I'm John Hemingway, and this is Hemingway's Parlay. And today we have a very interesting interview. Just to say a few things about Shirrel Rhoades. He is an American writer, publisher, professor, filmmaker, and the former executive vice president of Marvel Entertainment. He was born in North Carolina. He studied at various universities, Wake Forest University, Stetson University, where he got his Master in Fine Arts in 1964. And moving on from that, he also was a journalist, and he was a layout artist with the Florida Union Times. It's a newspaper here in Jacksonville. And then he won the Associated Press and Florida Press Association's awards for his feature writing. We'll talk more about that later as regards gonzo journalism and the fact that he invented it. Okay. Now, moving on to magazines and comics, there is a lot to say about this man. Okay. In 1968, Rhoades became the executive editor of Etienne Dupuis Jr. Publications, the Nassau-based publisher of the Bahamas Handbook and other travel and educational titles. In 1972, he returned to the States and launched Directions, a travel magazine for the Great Smoky Mountains region. And in 1973, he joined Open Court Publishing in Illinois to launch Cricket, a literary magazine for children. In charge of Open Court's magazine division, he also launched a British edition called Cricket and Company and oversaw the London-based Encounter magazine. In 1976, Rhoades became associated publisher of Harper's Magazine. Oh, wow, one of the magazines I read when I was going to UCLA. During the editorship of Louis Lapham, 3 years later, he was recruited to Charter Publishing as vice president of consumer marketing for Ladies' Home Journal, Redbook, and Sport. After the interim assignment with American Heritage, Rhoades joined Scholastic in 1983 to launch Family Computing magazine. As vice president and group publisher, he simultaneously oversaw Scholastic's consumer and professional magazine divisions. In 1988, he purchased his own periodical, Opportunity magazine. Later, he would launch a sister publication, Income Plus, both aimed at small business entrepreneurs. In 1996, Rhoades became executive vice president of Marvel Entertainment, succeeding Stan Lee as publisher of Marvel Comics. He left Marvel 3 years later following the Comic Wars, joining Reader's Digest as vice president of new business development. He went on to launch a new book division for Reader's Digest Association. During the early 2000s, he served on a consulting base as editorial director and fiction editor for the Saturday Evening Post. And one of the first short stories, I believe, if not the first short story that they published on the reborn Saturday Evening Post was written by me. And so I owe a lot to Shirrel for that. He's been something of a mentor to me all these years. In 2013, Rhoades, along with attorney Albert L. Kelly, founded Absolutely Amazing eBooks, a virtual publishing company that specializes in ebooks and POD, or print-on-demand paperbacks. In 2015, they acquired the New Pulp Press, an award-winning publishing house known for its crime fiction and noir mysteries. Consulting, and here he really has gone just about every place. Okay, his clients have included Microsoft and Warner Brothers, Time Incorporated, DC Comics, Mad Magazine, Disney Publishing, Hilton International, Discovery Channel, Canadian Living, Annie's, Strategic Fulfillment Group, Gray Advertising, J. Walter Thomas Direct, and on and on and on. Okay. He has helped develop strategic plans for such media companies as America Online, AOL, the Saturday Evening Post Society, US Kids, Cowles Media, Mad Magazine, Caras Publishing. He co-authored a worldwide fulfillment strategy for Microsoft. Awards and associations. Shirrel was honored by the Association for Education in Journalism and Mass Communication as Professional of the Year in 2014. In 2012, Stetson University honored him as a distinguished alumnus. He has chaired the Consumer Marketing Committee of the Magazine Publishers of America and was a member of the MPA's Finance Committee. He was nominated for the Direct Marketing Association Hall of Fame in 1997, as well as the Circulation Hall of Fame in 1998. He was inducted in the FMA Hall of Fame in 2012 and is a member of the Circulation Survivors Hall of Fame. He has served on the board of directors of American Family Publishers, XYZ, and other organizations. See the museums below. He has also been on the advisory board of the New York Academy of Sciences, Home Business Institute, Nancy's Secret Garden, Key West Film Institute, etc. Shirrel is the author, editor, and publisher of numerous books. His college textbooks include, and I'll name a few here, Magazines, A Complete Guide to the Industry with David Eatsumer, Comic Books, How the Industry Works, and A Complete History of American Comic Books, a textbook on the history of American comics. He has written a number of best-selling books under many pen names. These include mysteries, spy novels, science fiction, travel, and children's books. Rhoades has penned hundreds of magazine articles and thousands of reviews. He is known for his entertainment and travel articles, Saturday Evening Post, Good Old Days, Looking Back, Solaris Hill, Sunday Magazine, Tropic Cinema Blog, etc. Okay, as a film critic, this is really one of his passions here. In addition to being the film critic for the Florida Times Union in the 1960s, Shirrel currently serves as the film critic for the Cook Communications newspaper chain, which is the Key West Citizen, the Daily Reflector, and the Rocky Mountain Telegram, among others. His syndicated column is called Front Row at the Movies. His top 10 movie lists remain popular with readers. He is a former correspondent of Amusement Business. His movie star profiles were a long-standing feature in Good Old Days magazine, and he has appeared as a regular co-host of Art Waves Film on Friday radio program on Conk AM. I believe that would have to be a Key West station, considering that it's called Conk. As a filmmaker, at Marvel Entertainment, he was involved in planning and producing movies based on Marvel superheroes. He provided publishing support for films, Blade, Daredevil, etc., approved the rough cut for Men in Black, and was involved in planning later Marvel films like Spider-Man and Iron Man. In Key West, he produced a series of official Fantasy Fest DVDs starring Tracy Brigham, Joanna Krupa, Melissa Wolf, etc. He acted as consulting producer on such films as Key West, City of Color, Veritas, Resurrection Mary, Year of the Donkey, and My New Life, among others. His production company, Gee Whiz Entertainment, holds the rights for numerous film projects. Oh, he also did a film on my grandfather. I didn't know this. But anyway.
I'll send you a copy.
That too was in Key West, a city where Shirrel has had an enormous, I should say, imprint on the town. In fact, looking at the museums here, he says, he was a two-time president of the Key West Art and Historical Society, a great museum. If you're ever in Key West, you should go visit it. He helps oversee 3 museums, actually 4, Custom House Museum, Lighthouse and Keeper's Quarters, and Fort East Martello. And there is another one. And if you can name it, you get the prize for today. He has been a lecturer at the Key West Art and Historical Society Distinguished Speaker Series and a guest presenter at the Keys History and Discovery Center. For a number of years, he wrote a history column for the Florida Times Union and has written a number of history-based articles. In philanthropy, we need to mention that he is an exceptional collector of art of all kinds. We're talking about photography, painting, sculpture, comics, and everything in between. His house, which I have seen, is a virtual museum in itself. He has donated to collections to colleges, universities, and museums such as Savannah College of Art and Design, Monterey Peninsula College, Ball State University, Florida Keys Community College, Key West Film Society, and the Key West Art and Historical Society, among others. He's also donated magazine and comic book collections to Savannah College of Art and Design, as well as a significant fossil collection to the Darien Nature Center in Connecticut. As a lecturer, he has lectured at New York University Center for Publishing, and he has also been a professor in residence at Ball State University. He has lectured at Columbia University, Rochester Institute of Technology, University of Florida, University of Texas, Baruch, Radcliffe Publishing Procedures, Monterey Peninsula College, St. Leo's, Savannah College of Art and Design, and he has also served as the Associate Chair of the Magazine Publishers of America Education Committee. During his publishing career, Rhoades was frequently a speaker at industry functions sponsored by a lot of people. I guess I don't know what most of these things are. Anyway, I think that is a sufficient introduction to a man I consider to be a Renaissance man, American Renaissance man of 2 centuries, the 20th and the 21st. So, to the questions. For one, how are you doing today, Shirrel?
Fine.
How do you feel after all that?
After all that, I'm exhausted. I didn't realize I'd done so much.
You have. I mean, this is the thing that when I started, doing some research on your past and everything, I said, "Good Lord!" And I was trying to, think of a title, and I said, "Renaissance man." Yeah, he's an American Renaissance man.
Well, as I told you before, I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina, and so my wife, who grew up in California, likes to refer to me as her redneck Renaissance man.
Redneck Renaissance man. That could be another title for it. Yeah.
It's that growing up in a sort of a small town, impoverished area, I saw the world from afar. I saw the world through television, where everybody on television talked funny, because I grew up talking, basically mountain talk, and it never occurred to me until later in my life that I could be out there and be one of them. And so I went off to college, and as a cousin described it, you ran away and never came back. She made it sound like I joined the circus, but
or the French Foreign Legion or something like that.
Yeah, it was kind of strange, but basically, I blame it all on my high school. My high school yearbook gave people titles, and I wanted to be the most talented. That was my goal, to be the most talented.
Yeah, but it says you were the most versatile.
I was the most versatile because I was the school photographer. I was the school's acknowledged writer. I was the school's artist. And so I won most versatile, which I think means jack of all trades, master of none. And so then I went off to college, and I wound up majoring in art, and my art professor took me aside and he said, "You've got to make a decision. You can't be a great artist and a great photographer." I actually dispute that idea, but that was the choice he gave me. So I became a writer. And you look at my resume, it looks like a well-planned career, but I assure you that it was totally accidental. One thing led to another. It was serendipity, the happy coincidence of things just leading through your life. And here I am.
No, it is. It's amazing. I was just, how did you, most people usually have maybe 1 or 2 different careers, but you've had a career as a writer, as a publisher, as a filmmaker, as an art collector, as an art critic, as a critic of film. It's... I see this as a sign of tremendous curiosity and tremendous creativity at the same time.
Well, I've always been curious. I used to in high school at night while my parents went to bed. I used to simultaneously watch old movies on the Late Show, which got me into movies, and I also had a set of encyclopedias that I would go through and make little 4x5 index cards of interesting facts that I found in the encyclopedia. And so I had a card catalog of interesting things,
Hmm.
uh, and and that just sort of led off. I mean, you describe me as I like to be described as a collector. I think my wife considers me a pack rat. Uh,
Yeah. I think if Gene, yes, could do something, it would be maybe buy another three houses and put them all together. But then she knows that you would probably fill up the other houses.
I would at one point in Key West we owned 7 houses,
Uh-huh.
and now we don't own any. Although I still consider that one of my residences. It's just that we're between houses.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, right now I'm living at our house up in North Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
and the reason that I came up here is that I went to a convention in Las Vegas once when I was at Scholastic and saw George Carlin, the comedian. And he did his routine where he was saying that a house is just a place to hold your shit. And I thought, well, that makes sense. I've got a lot of shit.
Yeah,
And
I'd say so.
I was living in a big house in Key West, which is expensive because
Mm-hmm.
it's a
Yeah.
small island. And it occurred to me, and I had a small house up in North Carolina. And it occurred to me that I was doing it backward, that I should have a house up in North Carolina where real estate is a little cheaper to put all my shit and have
Mm-hmm.
a smaller place in Key West, which, would be comfortable. I'm halfway there. I bought the bigger house in Key West. All my shit is up here.
Mm-hmm.
You've been a guest in my house a couple of times. You've seen it. And I'm
I
now,
forgot to mention photography, but I mean, not just photography, which is historic, okay, but special collections that you have, that perhaps you can see in the bathroom or maybe in the room that you happen to be in.
well, this room
If you know
happens
what
to
I'm
be
talking.
filled more with, this room is filled more with modern art. As
Yeah,
you can see,
sure.
Moreau's and Calders and Giacometti's and
It's astounding
all
what you
those
have.
guys. In my bedroom are the old masters, everybody from uh, Rembrandt to Picasso to
Hmm.
Wall, who's one of my favorites, to Salvador Dali. But I also have for 40 years collected original photographs by famous photographers, and I have closets and file cabinets full and full and full of original photographs. And I think that's wrong. I think that photographs are meant to be seen, not to be stored away in a closet. In fact,
Hmm.
for 20 years, I've promised a piece to Yale University, but I haven't given it to them because they want to put it in a drawer. And,
Ah,
and
yeah.
people would have to come in and sign it out to look at it. And so what I've been doing for the last, probably the last 20 years, collecting for 40 years, but about 20 years ago, I started giving it away to colleges and universities.
Uh-huh.
Uh, uh, Original collections of 19th and 20th century photography. And uh, I remember talking at an exhibit of my work that I donated to Savannah College of Art and Design, talking to the president, Paula Wallace. And I said, this is a pretty good deal. I get the fun of collecting it. Then I give it to you. You pay to frame it. You
Hmm.
put it up on the wall and
Yeah,
give me an exhibit space. You put my name over it, the Shirrel Rhoades Photography Collection,
sure.
and I get a tax write-off.
Ah.
And she said, that's right, keep doing it. And
Yeah.
so I've given Savannah probably 4 or 5 different collections of photographs and also a large collection of comic books from my collection. The one that I gave them, my wife still berates me over, is I gave them Amazing Spider-Man #1,
Hmm.
which was worth, I think, when I gave it away, I think it was
Number
worth
one?
#1.
Oh my
Uh,
God.
it was worth $60,000 when I donated it. A couple of years later, it was worth 300,000, and somebody told me they had seen one auction off for 3 million. Uh, but
That's amazing.
good for Savannah. Uh, and I've also got an original Action Comic #1, the first appearance of Superman,
Oh,
There's only
wow.
200 of them in the world that are
Hmm.
known. Mine's not in good condition. It has no cover. It's foxed and dog-eared and all that, but it is a genuine #1 action comic. And I've got a comic book dealer who's for several years had a standing offer of he'd pay me $25,000 for it, but I know I could sell it for 2 or 3 times that much. The problem is with all my collections, I can't find it. It's here somewhere. It's in my library, but
Yeah,
I can't find it.
there's a whole section of your house there, which is just files upon files upon files, downstairs there. Yeah.
It's a library. I've always wanted to have a library. It's larger than a local small town library near me. Uh, and for Christmas, one of my presents, my wife gave me a pillow to go on the reading chair down there that says, "Yes, I really do need all these books."
Yeah, that's the problem with books. You get them and then, they just sit there. You need to probably, yeah, everyone needs to create their own sort of lending library, I suppose.
What got me started in one sense was going back to high school. I had an algebra professor, and he flunked me, and I went back and took it and made an A just to show I could do it. But he taught me a very valuable lesson. He used to give us open book tests.
Hmm.
And the reason he gave us open book tests, he said, is later in life, you're going to find that it's not how much you know, but knowing where to go to find the answer.
Yeah, that's true
And
too.
with my books and library and stuff, I can find most any answer. And of course, this started long before the internet and all the online research you can do and digital books. And I've got a huge collection of digital books because they don't take up any space.
Hmm. Oh,
But
yeah, of course, yes, because you were working for that one. Well, it was actually your company
I,
there.
I yeah,
Absolutely amazing histories. Yeah, that was it.
yeah, absolutely amazing ebooks that published both ebooks and trade paperbacks. And I
Hmm.
sold it a couple of years ago, but we started it from scratch as a way of finding an outlet for promising young artists and authors who couldn't get published. Publishing, one of the dirty little secrets of publishing, as you well know, is that you can't get published by a major publisher unless you have an agent, and you
Yeah.
can't get an agent unless you've been published. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of a catch-22.
It
And
is a strange situation. Yeah.
so with absolutely amazing ebooks, I accepted new authors who didn't have an agent. I dealt directly with the authors, and
Hmm.
I launched a lot of authors and what have you, and take great pride in them. And some of them have gone on to win major awards and things with their work. So I kind of feel it's a way of playing it forward. The success you've had and the people that have helped you along the way.
Hmm.
Now, I have to pause to tell you. You give me credit for being a mentor to you. I see it from the different end of the telescope. I see myself as a fan of yours. Uh, and
Well, yeah,
but
I mean, you published that short story there in the Saturday
Saturday Evening
Evening
Post.
Post because my grandfather tried to sort of get four of them published, I think it was.
Well, I'll tell the story. I was hired by Saturday Evening Post to help them bring it closer to its roots, and of course, its roots was one of great outlet for fiction. It published everybody from uh, you know uh, uh, name a famous writer. They were there. Everybody from Edgar Allan Poe uh,
Fitzgerald, was he in it?
oh yeah,
Hmm.
Fitzgerald and what have you. And so, of course, when I was asked to bring it back to its roots, I went back to see who they had published. And of course, there's this psychological condition called the Mandela effect, uh,
Hmm.
where we falsely remember things. People remember that Mandela was killed in prison, but he
Oh,
wasn't.
right.
People remember that the little guy on the Monopoly box has a monocle, but he
Hmm.
doesn't.
He doesn't.
People remember eating Jiffy peanut butter, but there
Yeah,
was
but
never a Jiffy peanut butter.
I thought that he had a monocle too.
Yeah,
That's
that
the thing.
Mandela effect. And there is no Jiffy peanut butter. There was Jif peanut butter and Skippy peanut butter, but never Jiffy. So people have these false memories. And I had this, as many people think, Hemingway was published in the Saturday Evening Post.
It would seem
Well,
logical.
I was there. I had access to all the files. I went back through all the files And I found out that the Saturday Evening Post never published a story by Ernest Hemingway. They once featured him on the cover with a story by Hotchner, but his stories were all rejected. I found at
How
least
many did he send?
I found 3 or 4 rejection slips. And he probably sent more than that because
Hmm.
I started researching it at that point, and I found that when he lived up in, where was it, Michigan,
Michigan,
uh,
yeah.
that he the local newspaper decided to do a profile on him, and the reporter came out to talk and interviewed or talked to the son of his landlady, and he said, "What does this guy Hemingway do?" And the son saw that Hemingway was sending all these packages off to the Saturday Evening Post submissions.
Hmm.
He didn't pay any attention that he was getting rejection slips. And
Oh,
so he said to the newspaper reporter, "That's Ernest Hemingway who writes for the Saturday Evening Post." And so Hemingway had this reputation for writing for the Post, even though it never accepted his stories. And
probably like a lot of us, when you get the rejection slips, it's like, that's raining today. Okay. Yeah.
well, I actually found a poem that Ernest Hemingway wrote when he was in Paris about America. He wrote it anonymously, but it's been attributed to him, and it's fairly long about what Americans are like. But the last paragraph or two says something to the fact of uh, of Americans are interesting because they do this, that, and another, and they like to read the Saturday Evening Post.
Okay.
So here I was at the Saturday Evening Post, and it seemed to me that there had been a great literary wrong here, that they had never accepted Ernest Hemingway. And I had met you once in Key West at a book signing where you were signing Strange Tribes, your
Oh,
first
right.
book.
Yeah.
And so I called up the bookstore and I said, "Can you give me John Hemingway's email?" And they trusted me enough that they knew I wasn't a stalker or something like that. So they did. And so I asked you if you had any stories, and you said you would write one for me. And you wrote a story called Uncle Gus that was sort of a semi autobiographical reminiscence of your Uncle Lester and your growing
Hmm.
up. And we published it as, I think, our very first new fiction and the revised Saturday Evening
Yeah.
Post.
In the revised
And
one. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
where you and I started knowing each other and communicating with each other and eventually becoming friends. And uh, it was sort of my trying to right history's wrong by finally putting a Hemingway in a
Yeah.
Saturday Evening Post.
But you even
But
sort of,
but to your credit, I wouldn't have just published you to publish you for the name. I published you because it was a damn good story.
but
And
you had
we
a,
had a very good fiction advisory board that I put together that included, people like Ray Bradbury and
he was
others
a
of that
friend of
ilk.
my father's. My father was going to
He,
UCLA back in the day in the 1950s.
oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
he became kind of a friend of mine, but it was an interesting relationship, interesting communications because Ray Bradbury didn't use email. And so to communicate with him, I had to call his daughter Alexandra. She
Hmm.
would call him. He would write something. He would call her back and dictate it to her. She would type it up and then she would email it to me.
Yeah.
And
That that was like my
that
father.
was
If you wanted
the
something,
communications with Ray Bradbury, and
you either had to
he
call him on the
was one of
phone or
my
yeah, something like that.
idols. Yeah, yeah, and usually you usually didn't call him on the phone. You usually called his daughter. I mean, he was.
Yeah.
I won't say standoffish. It wasn't that. It was that he, in his lifetime, he didn't like to fly.
Hmm.
I don't think he drove. He wound up living, I think, somewhat disgruntledly in California, where people don't walk. I mean, there are freeways. You don't.
Yeah, it's a bit
People
like
out walking
Jacksonville,
are sometimes viewed as suspicious, or at least so he said. But he was one of my favorite writers growing up, also, and so I've had the privilege. I've had the privilege at my grand old age of crossing paths with a number of writers that I grew up idolizing. I remember in high school reading The Old Man and the Sea and discovering The Sun Also Rises. And now I know you. I've met your father. I've met your Uncle Lester. I've met your sister. I've met other members of your family, which
Hmm.
growing up in the mountains of North Carolina, it seemed like an impossibility as a teenager in high school because people in my English book were famous, noted writers. And how would I ever have an opportunity to meet, people like Ray Bradbury or even, the son or grandson of Ernest Hemingway? I mean, that was beyond my comprehension. But
Well,
here we are.
I'd say you're, well, yeah, I'd say you're a lucky man in the sense that you did get to meet all these people, but then that was one of the careers you chose. I mean, publishing, magazines, all these other sort of things like that related to writers, and it was bound to happen because, well, you're a cool guy, you're good to talk with, and you've got lots of stories, and so
You're
writers
you're,
like
you're
that.
freezing, but yeah, it was it's it's been by the pure accident of winding up in publishing and working in New York. I've met a lot of very famous people and becoming a film critic, film writer. I've met a lot of famous movie stars, and these are people that were, basically fantasies for me as a young man. Uh, I mean, I've been Frank Sinatra's guest at the Fontainebleau. I've been,
Oh wow.
Clint Eastwood's guest on the set of Paint Your Wagon. I've been at the world premiere hanging out with Steve McQueen for the Thomas Crown Affair. And what you find
Oh
is that
wow.
that famous people, famous actors, noted writers, whatever, some of them are just like you and me. Some of them are nice guys, and some of them
Mhm.
are jerks. And so,
But it's like everything in life, it depends. You never know what you're going to find. You know.
but it's always been interesting uh, to at least be on the edge of those things that we view as part of our culture, as part of our cultural heritage, either pop culture or even more, uh, uh, serious culture.
Hmm.
Uh, I, I I wound up in publishing by accident. I took a job out of college with the newspaper as a
Mm-hmm.
layout artist, and the kindly old editor thought that I was smart and had me do some book reviews, and he liked those, so he had me do some articles. And he was having an affair with his assistant editor, and he was going to divorce his wife and marry her, and she was going to divorce her husband and marry him. But because of the stress, she started seeing a psychiatrist. And so when she got her divorce, she, of course, married the psychiatrist. And so he fired her. And he came to me, put his arms around my shoulder, and he said, "Son, you've been very loyal." And it seemed that loyalty was the criteria to be the assistant editor. And so
Yes.
I became the assistant editor of the magazine and the chief feature writer for the Florida Times Union. And that got me started on the career that I'd always dreamed of as of being a writer. And then I took a detour because I found that being a writer, it was better to become an editor so I could control how my writing was used.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found out it was better to become a publisher so I could control how the whole publication was used. And I found out very quickly that rather than being a starving artist in a garret, it was better to be a fat cat, wealthy publisher. And so I spent a lot of my career on the other side of the desk, dealing with writers and dealing with words that other people wrote. And what I found also that was very seductive and perhaps hypocritical is I found out that as I got to know direct marketing better, I could spend a weekend writing a direct mail package for a company for $10,000, where I could spend 2 years working on a novel that I might not get published, but if I did, I might get a $10,000 advance that I probably never earn out.
Mm-hmm.
So it was an easy choice to do I take the easy money or not. But once I kind of finished my career of running other people's magazines and a couple of magazines that I owned and working with Marvel Comics, where Stan Lee handpicked me to succeed him as publisher. Uh, I eventually got to return to that which I love, which is writing magazines and books and things like that. And I frequently do them under pen names, not because I'm ashamed of the writing, but I'm mindful of my audience. I've written 20 cozy mysteries under a female pen name because women don't want to read a cozy mystery by a man. The same reason that when I was at Scholastic, we had uh, uh, Joanne Rollins, who wrote the Harry Potter books. We had her use her initials because we were afraid that boys wouldn't want to read a book written by a woman.
Hmm.
And so perhaps it's sexist and perhaps it's prejudicial and stuff, but I've written 20 Quilters Club books under a pen name. I've written 3 uh, uh, Phantom Cook mysteries under a pen name. I've written a number of other books, mysteries and stuff under pen names. I've written some books under my own name, like travel books and uh, uh, some mysteries and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But to me, it's not. I'm not looking for the fame. I'm just looking for a way to share my writing in a way that
Because you like
it's.
writing, I would say. Yeah.
I like writing, and the fact is, if I were to be very truthful and very selfish about it, I don't write movie reviews for my readers. I write them for me. I write them so I can get to go see movies because I like to watch movies.
I mean,
Uh,
fundamentally, that's why anyone writes a fiction book. I mean, it's because they like it. Because if you're going to do that, and if maybe it takes you a year to write it, it better be interesting to you, because otherwise, it's
right.
probably not going to be interesting to any of your readers, too.
Well, you're going to live it, and so it's
Yeah, yeah.
to me, movies and books are like true time capsules, true time machines in a sense, in that it allows you for an hour or two or more to live a different life. And so I feel like in my life, I've led many different lives that were enjoyable, that I borrowed from a writer like you. I get to go on the journey that you take me. I get to share a world that you created, and it's sometimes a different world than I know. And so I think it not only entertains me, but it makes me probably a more rounded, knowledgeable person.
I have one question here, and it's really something I've thought a lot about since I found out who you worked with. What was it like working with Stan Lee? What kind of person was he?
Stan Stan was a character first and foremost. Uh, we think of Stan as being some kind of genius because he created all of these archetypal superheroes. I mean, if you look at if you look at the X-Men, what they're really about are people who are different than us, who are cast outs, and it was really a sort of an essay on race relationships.
Ah,
If you look at the Hulk, it was about teenage angst. Teenagers have so much anger inside them, and sometimes it bursts out like a hulking monster. And Stan got credit for creating all of these wonderful archetypes that allowed us to identify with them. And that's why they became popular and why Marvel became so successful.
hmm.
Uh, but the truth is, he didn't deliberately do that. That was part of his inner being, part of his psyche, whatever.
Hmm.
Uh, as Stan laughed and told me one time, he said, I didn't know I was writing great stuff. He said, I was just trying to crank out comic books to hold on to my job.
Oh, God.
But Stan epitomized what a quote that I paraphrased from Kurt Vonnegut.
Hmm.
Kurt Vonnegut once said, "Be careful of who you pretend to be, because that's who you are."
Oh,
And
wow. That's a
and
heavy one.
Stanley Lieber, a nice Jewish boy from you know across the river in New York, went to work for his cousin's publishing company.
Hmm.
And by being there as a gopher to go get coffee and stuff, when the stars, Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, quit, and I never knew Jack Kirby, who's called the King in comics. I did know Joe Simon pretty well. When they quit, Stan got made the editor of Marvel at like about 19 years old or so,
Wow.
and and actually lived up to it. And He was fairly lazy in one sense, in that he created what we call today the Marvel method or the Stan Lee method, which is comic books mostly are plotted like a movie script. Panel one, you see the hero, he says this, that, another. Panel two. Uh, but Stan would go into his artist and collaborate. He'd go in and say, I got this idea for this character, and he's this, that, and another. And what if we have him do this, that, and another? And there's this villain that does that and another. And then he'd walk away. So then the artist would come up with a look for the character and draw the panels. And then Stan would come back in and he'd put the words in. He'd invent the dialogue and put it in. And so Marvel doesn't even use the Marvel method anymore, but that's the way that Stan did it. And he
How
cranked
long
out
would
a
it
lot
take
of
him to do a just one comic book? Okay, if he had to sort of did he didn't do the drawings, did he? He just did
No,
the
actually, everybody thinks that Stan was an artist. He wasn't. He was actually an editor and a
okay.
sometimes writer and obviously a creator. I consider Stan America's greatest creator, maybe second to Walt Disney, but maybe even ahead of Walt Disney. I mean, he created more characters, more superheroes that exist today and have an ongoing life and recognizability and what have you. But Stan, when I say that he pretended to be Stan Lee, his name was Stanley Lieber, but he didn't want to use his real name because comic books were not dignified. He wanted to save his real name for when he wrote the Great American Novel. He
Oh,
never
okay.
did. He changed it. He broke his name Stanley down to Stan Lee,
Stan
and he
Lee.
eventually had it legally changed to that when he became quite successful as a comic book genius.
Hmm.
But Stan, he became the spokesman for Marvel. He became the face of Marvel. He became the figurehead of Marvel. And he took on this bombastic but self-deprecating personality. And the best example I ever saw of that is Stan and I were at the San Diego Comic-Con, and we're standing there, we're talking to David Hasselhoff about a movie that he's working
Hmm.
on. And we're just having a conversation like you and I are having, when all of a sudden comes a TV crew, and the minute their lights went on, Stan went from talking like this to, "Hiya, how are you? Good to see you. Come on over." And he goes into his Stan Lee persona. And even when I wrote two books about the comic book industry, I got Stan to write an afterword for one of them, and he says, "It's a good thing you're doing. Maybe you'll find you'll inspire the next Tolstoy." And I
Oh,
said,
wow.
well, maybe I can inspire the next Stan Lee. He said, "Oh no, you couldn't find anybody that good." And so he was bombastic, but he was self-deprecating and also self-aggrandizing. But you didn't take it seriously. And he was a fascinating character. When I first got hired by Marvel, I'd been brought in by the president and asked to do a consulting job for 6 months and write a white paper telling them how to reorganize like a real publishing company. And I was told that if you're smart, you're going to tell us that we need a publisher, a real publisher. Stan was really more of a figurehead at that time, and that you'll tell us that you're the guy. Well, 2 weeks later, that president got fired, and a new one came in, and he says, "Forget the white paper. I want to hire you to be the publisher." And I said, "Okay." We start negotiating, and then he gets fired a couple of months later, or gets shoved aside, actually. And then in comes another president, and we sort of had president du jour during that period. And so he says, I want to hire you. Here's the contract. Sign hard. Make 2 copies.
Hmm.
Uh, and before I can sign it, in comes the corporate lawyer saying, wait, he can't sign that. I just looked at Stan's contract, and it specifies that Stan will have the title of publisher for life. So they
That's
hired me as
very
acting
sort
publisher.
of socialist. I don't know.
Yeah, what have you. And so after a few months of working with Stan called him up and he said, "Give him the title. He's doing the job." And so Stan handed over the title of publisher to me, and I'm the first guy to have the title after Stan Lee. And they flew Stan in to meet me, and we all went out to dinner. And Stan, in the middle of dinner, he said, "I think we finally got the right team." And I was very flattered. And as I went out the door after the dinner, one of my number two guy kind of nudged me. He said, "Don't take that seriously." He says that every time.
No.
And so, yes, every time we hired a new executive, we'd take him out to dinner to meet Stan, and Stan would say, "I think we finally got the right team." And so, I was one of the right teams, I suppose.
What were the
I
comic wars?
Oh well, it had nothing to do with comic books really, in that uh, back way back in the uh, before probably the early '90s or so. Uh, I was approached by an investment banking group. They had the Wahlberg Pincus Financial Group wanted to buy Marvel Comics. It was on the market. New World Pictures was selling it. And we went in and we bid $75 million.
Hmm.
And they said, well, the due diligence, you can go down the hall. We got a room with stuff in it. You can look at it for one day. That's all. If you want something, you can request it, but we won't necessarily show you. And we said, for $75 million, we expect more access than that. And we got up and left.
Yeah.
Stupidest thing we ever did. Ron Perlman, the guy that owned Revlon, came in and bought it for, I think it was what, 81 or $82 million. And he made it back out of cash flow within 3 years. And he was taking the money out of Marvel and using it to buy companies like Coleman and Hummer and stuff like that. He was, he is quite a mogul. And he he put out these junk bonds to raise money that he could use on his other acquisitions and stuff.
Hmm.
And so he basically bled Marvel dry. And so when I came into Marvel, Marvel was almost bankrupt. All the money had been pulled out. And so Perlman agreed that he would reinvest in Marvel, that he would put in, I think it was $350 million investment into Marvel, but that would dilute the stock of all the people who owned the junk bonds.
All right.
And what he didn't know is that a bigger shark than him, named Carl Icahn, the guy that bought TWA and disbanded that,
Oh, right. Yeah.
Carl Icahn had been buying up these junk bonds secretly. And so he stepped up and sued Perlman that he had uh, been fiduciary, irresponsible, or whatever, and he won. And suddenly, Icahn owned Marvel, and I was called up to Icahn's office, and I, head to head with Icahn, explained how comic books work to him,
Hmm.
and about 150 of his loyal employees lined up at this conference table to watch us. And shortly after that, though, Perlman threw a poison pill into the deal by putting Marvel into bankruptcy before Icahn could get full control of it. And so then a bankruptcy judge came in, and then a company called Toy Biz that had an exclusive license to do Marvel toys at no royalty, which was a big problem for me. Uh, uh, Perlman had made a deal with them that gave him control of it secretly, uh, but they knew that under bankruptcy, their contract, their license could be canceled and they'd be out of business. So Ike Perlmutter, the head of that company, had to buy Marvel in order to save his own company. So he wound up buying Marvel, and the first thing he did, because he's known to be a very tight-fisted guy, first thing he did was cancel the Christmas party. Second thing he did was cancel the free coffee. Third thing he did is yell at
Cancel
people for
free
Xeroxing.
coffee in America. God, those are
Yeah,
fighting words, you know.
exactly. And he yelled at people for Xeroxing on only one side of the paper.
Hmm.
If he found a paper clip near your desk on the floor, he yelled at you for squandering his resources. And then he fired all the executives, anybody that made more than $1.98, I like to say. And he fired me and Stan Lee on the same day. We were kind of the last to go. And that was called the Comic Wars. There was actually a book written about it. The book looks at it from 30,000 feet. My name's not even in there. A former president of Marvel is not even in there. Another president of Marvel got one sentence, but it's really about the battle between the Titans for control. And it was called the Comic Wars. And so during that period, I reported to one, two, three, four different presidents, and I think maybe five different chairmans and
Hmm.
whatever. So it was kind of like one day you didn't know who you were working for. And I was actually, I don't really take credit for this, but actually one comic book store owner uh, once said that I saved the comic book industry because while they were fighting over control and ownership, I kept Marvel publishing comic books. And
Uh,
without Marvel, all the comic book stores, which is where you find comic books these days, they would have collapsed because I had the largest market share in the industry. I was about, I don't know, maybe 35% of the market. DC was like maybe 24% of the market. And everybody else, Archie was like maybe 6%. Image was like maybe 5%. Everybody was in the single digits. And if Marvel had stopped publishing comic books, all the comic book stores, which are basic little mom and pop type things, were really more pop than mom
would
because
have
it was
collapsed, basically. Yeah.
they would have gone under and the industry would have collapsed. So I got credit for saving the comic book industry, but
Well, there are a lot of people
basically,
that I know who would love to shake your hand, I think, because they were all avid. I mean, even a step brother of mine, Sean Hemingway, who now works at the Museum of what was it, Modern Art or something like that. No, not the Modern Art, not the MoMA, but yeah, maybe the big one there on Fifth Avenue. And he had collections of first editions and stuff like that. He was always going out to get comics. So if it
mhm.
hadn't been for you, one of his hobbies would have gone up in smoke.
Up
Yeah.
in smoke. Well, it was an interesting time. I was in an interesting position in that I was one of the executives. I was executive vice president of Marvel and in charge of all publishing. And but I chose not to set up on the top floor with all the suits. I chose to have a corner office down on the floor with all the editors and writers and creators. Uh, and
It
I,
suits your
I
character as a person and your whole life. I would add too.
well, I had to convince the suits that I was their watchdog on these crazy comic book creators, and I had to convince the comic book creators that I was their protector from these suits who didn't care about comics, which was
Hmm.
true. And in comic book terms, they gave me a comic book name. I was known as the Human Shield. I
Human's
was the
shield.
shield that stood between them and oblivion by all these Philistines who really didn't appreciate comics. And the comic book creators, the editors that worked for me, they were true believers, to use Stan Lee's terms. I mean, these were like real characters to them, real people. I mean, we know that it's all modern mythology. We know it's all made up. We know that there's not a real Spider-Man. But
Well, I
by
mean, I
golly, every
write
Friday,
fiction. I do the same thing. It's
exactly. Well, they bought into the world, and every Friday, Spider-Man showed up at my office with a tour, and they always like to come by my office because, like my home, my office was a great collection of various action figures and stand-ups of comic book characters, and I even had jars of eyeballs on my bookshelf, and
yeah. No, that sounds like you.
that's
Yes.
me. Yeah. Uh, and
Anyway.
so you once asked me what was the best job I ever had, and then
Hmm.
what was the worst job. Marvel was the best job I ever had. What's more fun than creating stories?
I
What's
can't
more
imagine,
fun than entertaining? And
honestly.
Marvel was the worst job I ever had.
Well,
It was a job that was in constant flux.
it was a
There
true love affair for you. It
it
starts
was a
out
love affair.
wonderful, but then something comes. Nothing lasts forever. That sort
Yeah,
of thing.
exactly. And it was you know, you were dealing with people that were fighting. I mean, I've been on many Marvel conference calls. I don't want to bust anybody's bubble, but the conference call with owner du jour was from our side was blank you, and their response was blank you, and our response was no blank you. And
Great.
I've seen them go 15 minutes of blank you without the blank,
Hmm.
and so so it was not all fun loving, jolly. Aren't we doing great,
Doesn't sound
wonderful,
like
fun
it.
stuff?
Does not sound like it. No. But
But
you're
it was fun.
privileged.
It was
Just the
fun.
same, in spite of everything, I'd say that you are an extremely privileged individual to have lived in that period, to have been able to work with Stan Lee, to save the comic books, the literal comic books, not just the films and everything, but for the true believers, the hardcore kids who go there and buy the comic books every week or month or however often they came out, and that's a beautiful thing. And on
Well,
that note, I
yeah.
would like to say that we're sort of pushing it here on the time wise. Not that I wouldn't talk with you all day, Shirrel.
Well, we can always have other conversations on and off air.
Yeah. Now you've got so much to say, and I mean, I wish I could sort of convey to the people who are listening to this just the I don't know the sheer amount of art that he has in the house that I have seen. Okay, I think there was a Banksy up there too, and something else, and
Oh, I've got Banksy's, and I've got just you name them.
Miro. I think I've seen one. Yeah,
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 and
amazing
and
stuff.
so
But the thing is, the art curator himself of that house is an amazing person, and he is he's art in himself. Okay, that's what I would define it.
I'm simply a guy who entertains himself.
Well, that you
I
do.
was I was an only child until I was about uh, mm, maybe 15, 16 years old, and my brother came along.
Oh
Uh,
wow, they got
and
they took a
uh,
break.
as I told him over the holidays, everything was fine until he ruined my life. Him and my sister coming along. But being an only child, you learn how to entertain and uh, play with your self, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so I still do that today. Basically, all that I do is to entertain myself.
That's the way it should be, in my opinion. Because I
Well,
mean,
good.
even the hard work and everything, that's it's if you like it, then it's good.
And the next conversation that you and I have to have, probably off air, is I want to hear what you're working on now. I want to hear what book you're working on.
A sequel to the one which I wasn't able to find a publisher for. That's Murder on the Florida Straits. The running title of it right now is Ron Echeverria. Okay, it's this sort of Spanish American guy, and he's the brother of, I can't get too much of this because it goes into the other story. But it's leggy dames, gin joints, lots of guns, bad guys who want to take over the world, and these Floridians are saying, screw that. I'll send you what I've got, and you can have a
I
look
would
at it.
love to. I would love to. I'm as I say,
I've got about
I'm
12,000 words, something like that.
I'm one of your biggest fans.
I know, and I appreciate it down here. I think I've got one fan up there in Lake
Hey,
Lure, North Carolina.
it always takes one to start.
There you go. There you go. All right, Shirrel. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, sir. It's been an extreme pleasure.